Hello, my name's John Costa. Welcome to the Documentary Media Centre. Tonight we're going to try our very first attempt at a reportage club called People, Places and Events, and we're going to be inviting people every couple of weeks to try different versions of this. Cafe conversations outside. We've done one already with Dr. Stein about Egyptian mummies, and tonight I've been joined by a good friend of mine, David Needham.
Evening.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come along.
My pleasure.
Suitably branded.
Of course, yeah.
Will we be mentioning the Leicester Tigers wheelchair rugby team, do you think, in our conversations?
I certainly hope so.
Good, I'm sure it'll come up. So the format for this evening is people, places and events, and I've asked Dave to pick 9 photographs, 9 images. It could have been 9 programmes, 9 articles from a newspaper around those themes, and it will just give us a little bit of structure to weave the conversation as we go along. We've also got 5 members of the audience, which you can't see, and at some point I'm sure if any of them have got a conversation, we'll be able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with this very first image, which is about people. Okay, yeah. And what is your earliest memory?
My earliest memory? Crikey. I can't say for certain that I haven't picked it up from a photograph, but I've got a very blurry image in my head of being held as a baby by my grandfather, who died when I was 18 months old. And I'm relatively convinced that it's a true memory. But just because of the blurriness, the fact I don't recognise the person, the angle that I've got of the face, but that's by far the earliest memory, and a very vague one.
Okay. And you've got 3 children as well. How old are they?
9, 8 and 6.
Okay. Is this a memory that you have specifically that's stronger since you've had your kids?
No.
Or is it something you've always had?
It's always been there. In fact, if anything, I know as you get older, it's weakened slightly, but it's there. It's sort of somewhere in the back of my mind, and I can recall it occasionally.
Secondary school, teachers.
Wow, yeah.
Anyone you can particularly remember by name and why you remember them?
Secondary school.
I'm trying to get to what kind of people you are.
Yeah. If you'd chosen any other school, then I probably could. But the secondary school was...
Feel free to pick primary school.
Yeah, primary school, there was a Mr. Dix. He was very, very child-orientated. He could work with individual characters, and he could get the best out of them very, very easily. It's not very often you come across somebody that can instantly just get the attention of just about anybody and pull them into what he wants them to do, but in a way that the child's going to actually enjoy. And he could do that. He was very sports orientated, which was probably one of the reasons that I found him such a good teacher. Yeah, absolutely. Going on to sort of high school, again, the sports teachers. I can't recall the name of the teacher in question, but again, a very good sportsman, and he invested a lot of time in people that wanted to put effort into sport, and that was very much appreciated.
So someone like Mr. Dix, is that how you judge the teachers that teach your 3 children? Do you hold them to that kind of benchmark?
I think that's very tricky. I don't think there are too many people, and I don't want to talk people down, but I don't think you come across that kind of character too often in any walk of life, let alone teaching. So I hope they bump into somebody like that, and I'm sure they will. They'll have a teacher that stands out in their memory. But it's more a case of the teacher recognising that the kids have potential. I'm a typical parent there. When you hear negative comments, that you instantly sort of start crying out from the inside. No, you've got that wrong. It might be an unrealistic perspective, but I've occasionally sort of had quiet words with teachers about the kids, but
I find that very hard to believe that they were quiet words. But.
They were. No, honestly, they were. It was more along the lines of, "Are you sure that my child isn't spinning you a yarn?" You know, because I know he's capable of more than that. I know she's capable of more than that, and they've gone away and it's resolved itself. Okay. But you don't get that many outstanding teachers. I've certainly not found that. There's 1, 2 or 3 in your lifetime.
Now, you've mentioned sport, obviously Mr. Dix, primary school, high school, sports teacher, and at some point you've found your way into rugby.
It's sports in general, but rugby.
So it wasn't just rugby; it was just
I was sports mad, sport nuts. Yeah.
Okay.
So I played all sorts.
And has it always been team sports as opposed to individual sports?
Well, that's the thing, because I've always considered myself quite a hard person to get on with. Quite sort of single-minded, and probably very much geared up to an individual sport. And I do like individual sport, but yeah, it's always been the team environment that I've sort of found myself sort of attracted to, which is very, very odd, and I've got no explanation for that at all.
It's strange, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And we will come on to your history of stubbornness, because it was mentioned on television a few weeks ago, wasn't it? So we will have to we'll have to mention that.
Yeah.
So we're going to come on to the first photograph now, under people, and why it goes around. That's to remind you, and as it whizzes around everybody. I see people after a meal. That was a rugby club outing, or so?
That was a cricket club, end of season meal.
Okay. Why does that stand out to you
because that was the last one I attended. That was these whole photographs sort of all start at the periphery of Motor Neurone Disease. Okay. So that's the starting point in a sense. So that was the last sort of evening out with the cricket club that I attended, and I'm just out of shot actually, but. That's got most of my teammates in there. Some of them really, really good cricketers. Yeah. So I should say all of them really, really good cricketers, not some. But yeah.
Well, yeah, we don't want to be sued.
No, don't want to be. No, absolutely.
In case any of them are really, really famous. Yeah. So the photograph of the event, which is the last one you attended, is that because after that you had your MND diagnosis, or did you already have MND there? I had MND there. That was where you stopped playing cricket.
At the time, it was unbeknown to me. But yes, MND was present then. I just hadn't figured it out. Okay. So at the time I just thought I was getting too old, and my body was telling me enough's enough, and you ought to go and try and find something else to do for the rest of your life. But as it turned out, even though I stopped, things continued to progressively decline.
And so that was kind of the very first.
That was an early one.
Early inklings of when you.
No, at that point, no idea. Yeah. The first inkling came with the next photograph when we sort of move on to it. That there was a definite something not quite right there. Yeah. But in typical bloke fashion, it was still about 2.5 years before I went to the doctors after this. So.
Now, you mentioned something to Rob and I on Rob's podcast about crossing the road.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was quite an interesting story at the time when you told it to us. Maybe you could tell us that.
Yeah, this was
kind of summed it up, didn't it?
It did. This is probably 3-4 years after the initial photograph. I found myself in incised. I think it was about 10:30 in the morning, and I was crossing what was then a pelican crossing, and I just became aware of a car that was approaching from my left-hand side that was not going to give way. It was clearly not going to give way, and even though I hadn't played any sport for about 18 months at that point, maybe a little bit longer, still a relatively active person, and sort of transitioning from a walk to a jog to avoid this car should have been a very simple thing. And it turned out it wasn't. And as I tried to sort of just transition from a walk just to a gentle jog, I couldn't do it. And it was the strangest thing. I stumbled, I tripped, I could not control my limbs in the way that the messages were not getting to the muscles in the way they did previously. And I ended up sort of falling, stumbling, just avoiding the car and falling onto the path. And my first thought there was to sort of look up around, saying, so if anybody had watched me there, they were thinking, that guy must be absolutely hammered. And it's only 10:30 in the morning. I was embarrassed. Luckily, there wasn't anybody watching. I picked myself up, took myself home and told Kate. And
was that the point where you decided that you were going to...
It was the point where Kate turned around and said, you shouldn't look around now. There's obviously something very wrong.
Or was this the point, Dave, where you decided it was going to be another 2 years before you did something?
It was about 6 months from that point.
So
before I went to the
6 months from that point.
Yeah, but she was right. Yeah, no two ways about that. But it took me about that long. But there was good reason for that. A big chunk of it was fear because I'd thought about what was going on, and I'd sort of tested myself, and I knew whatever it might be, it probably wasn't going to be good.
Had you been on the internet and kind of looked up symptoms? And things
no, it was more a case of I I would sit at home and I would test the movement. I would test the speed of the reaction. It all started in my left foot, and I would sort of time how long it would take for me to react and do things from right to left. And I knew there was an obvious discrepancy, and that instantly sort of I was aware of motor neurone disease, specifically ALS, and I knew that correlated.
So there was an element of self-diagnosis there for your point.
And it was a very similar time. I went to a party around about that time. It was to do with the rugby club, and I very sort of casually said to a good friend of mine, I wouldn't be surprised if I've got motor neurone disease. And his wife works in the medical profession, and they both laughed. Both laughed at me. So, that's such a rare condition. Chances of it being that. I said, well, I hope you're right. Yeah, it could be something less, but there's something not quite right. And I can remember at Kate's and I's wedding, that I hadn't seen this chap for a very long while, and I invited him to the wedding, and he didn't know at that point that I'd had a confirmed diagnosis of motor neurone disease. And he came up and said, well, obviously things have gone on. What happened? What's going on? And I said, it turned out to be MND, and you could see the colours went out of his face.
Can I ask you, when you got your first confirmation by a medical professional that it was MND, was it a relief?
No.
As in, like, you actually then knew what it was, or is it kind of like confirmation of something that you'd always thought?
I consider myself very, very lucky in the way that things happened. I can understand why it's a big hit for most people in this situation. But because I was given the time to work it out for myself, I wasn't having a great deal of joy with the neurology team in Leicester. I'd had about 6 visits and just repeated the same tests over and over. And on a couple of occasions, they turned around and said, well, actually, we can't see anything. And I had to turn around and say, why are you here? And I said, I'm here because I'm not imagining this. And it was quite frustrating to have those conversations repeatedly. And on my last visit to the Leicester team at the General, I asked them to refer me to an MND specialist, one of the 2 main MND specialists in the UK, in Sheffield, and that was Dame Professor Pam Shaw. And I expected them to knock me back, but they said, yeah, willingly. I got, the letter was written, I was invited up to Sheffield about 2-3 months later, and within a fortnight of that, they'd confirmed the diagnosis. Because I found out myself, it didn't really affect me emotionally at that point. I'd already been through that, and I'm not to say there's not sort of dark times within there, or even dark times ahead, forward of that point. But I can remember it hit Kate. She burst into tears, and that for me is the biggest memory from that day, because I think she'd really got her hopes up that it wasn't going to be that, and I think probably my perspective was just a little bit more. Less hopeful, more realistic, but it was what it was, and I was lucky also in the fact that the medical team up in Sheffield, there's some real horror stories elsewhere in the countries of people being told you've got 6 months, you've got 18 months to live, go away, make the most of it, that's it.
Put your affairs in order.
That was, in essence, that's what most people get. They never said that to me. They when the question was sort of, well, how long? They said, well, we don't know. And they were honest. And at that point, I just decided, well, it's up to me, isn't it? And I've done everything I can to sort of fight back against it. I'm still here, I'm still doing well, and I'm well beyond the 2 to 5 years that most people get. And I still hope to be here, sort of saying exactly the same thing in 10 years' time, probably beyond that. So
let's aim for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, those of us here, there's some new people that don't know you, and there's a few of us that do know you. But the interesting thing about the people that do know you is we've only ever known you in your chair. And this next photo is you.
Pick me out.
Well, you're standing up in the back row of this rugby photograph, but it looks like you're all linked arms. So I'm sure if you took your legs off the ground, you'd probably stay there. But pass that one around. Why is this the second photo that you've chosen?
That was the day where an awful lot happened within 5 minutes of that game starting. It was President's Day. I think it was 2008. President's Day.
I don't know much about rugby, but that sounds like it might be.
It was the last game of the season.
Okay. Right.
Just a celebration of the club and everybody in it. So, and I can remember there was a scrum. I think there were 2 scrums in the first 5 minutes. The second one completely went against us. Now, I've always been quite powerful, particularly in the lower half of my body, my legs, stomach, etc., from the core down. Never had any strength issues. And I can remember the prop in front of me, Scott, screaming at me to put some power through because the scrum was going backwards. And I hadn't got anything. I just hadn't got anything.
You were like a passenger almost.
Yeah, a complete passenger. And the scrum went backwards uncontrollably. I got my head stuck in the scrum. A second row, so not particularly dangerous, but I hurt myself. Just the same, my ankle went over one way, my neck went the other way, there was a large crack, and I lay on the ground thinking, am I in trouble? And I sort of thought to myself, and I thought for a while, I thought, no, well, everything's still sort of there. I can feel everything, so it can't be as bad as I thought, but the thought at that point occurred to me, well, that's the end of your rugby. Yeah, there's no way in the world. I'd hurt myself at the beginning of the season. I hurt myself right at the very end. I'd only played the 2 games. And I thought, well, okay, your body said, enough. I found out in a car accident I had in 2012 that in all probability that day I had broken my neck. So again, incredibly lucky. Yeah, incredibly lucky that nothing happened, and that was the bone right at the top of the neck. So if that had gone, that would have been the end of it. So it's as crazy as it sounds. Even though I'm sat in a wheelchair in front of you talking to you, I still consider myself an incredibly lucky person.
Yeah, you could have been sitting in a wheelchair because of
that. I say if it had gone at that point, there would have been no coming back from it. So you have to be a lot further down for it to be survivable.
Now, without wanting to incur the wrath of anybody watching this from your wheelchair rugby club days, I'm about to say, was that the last competitive game you played as someone that wasn't in a wheelchair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was that a big moment? When you look back now, is that kind of a defining moment for you? Because really, from that moment on, all of your sport was...
It stopped at that point, totally, and that was a mistake. With hindsight, that was a mistake because in stopping, I believe I invited the progression of the MND to accelerate, and it wasn't until I sort of got to grips with things, and Kate really sort of pushed me to get back involved with sport, that I think I got a grip on the speed that it progressed, and I slowed it down again.
So if we say, the things that we know you for, like wheelchair rugby, your Mountain Shrike, and all the things we're going to come on to, if it wasn't for those, in essence, you think that would have accelerated?
I think if I wouldn't be here speaking to you now. I think I would have disappeared a long while ago if it wasn't for the fact that I got pushed in the right direction, and I found myself back in an environment that I was very comfortable in, and it occurred very quickly that the progression wasn't accelerating anymore. In fact, it almost was plateauing. So the more active I've become, the better results I've been getting.
So we're going to come on to the third photograph now. And obviously, for those that don't know, this is Kate, that you've mentioned quite a few times.
She hates this picture.
She hates this picture?
She hates this picture, purely from a personal perspective. Not the kids in there, but she hates the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't say what she says she looks like, but...
we'll use it anyway, because we'll know then she'll love watching this video.
Of course,
And obviously the 3 munchkins themselves.
The rat bags, Yeah. They're 3 very strong characters.
I wonder where they got that from.
Yeah, okay, of course. Of course, yeah.
So they're now 9...
9, 8 and 6.
9, 8 and 6.
Yeah.
So for someone in the situation who doesn't have an MND diagnosis, we're looking to things like GCSEs, being 18, prom, uni, all that kind of stuff. How do you process that? Because most of the time, I think the last infographic you put out on your timeline that was about MND was very much along the lines of life expectancy around what you were saying at the very early days that some other people get. I mean, how do you kind of process it? Is that part of that drive, like how you were exercising the other day at Matt Hampson's gym? Do you draw on that as well?
Absolutely.
Or do you just not think about it? How do you deal with it?
No, I try to turn it around, or certainly do my best to turn it around into a positive, a motivation. That there is no better motivator than fear. And if you see something coming that no one would want, then it can really drive you on to fight back. And that, in a nutshell, is my nature. It always has been. I can be quite a laid-back character, let things go that most people perhaps wouldn't, until I'm stuck in a corner. And then my natural instinct is just to fight. It's not something I have to put any great effort into. It's just what happens. And for the most part, as crazy as it sounds, and people have pulled faces at me when I've said it to them, particularly other people with motor neurone disease. But in a very perverse way, I have got a great deal to be thankful of motor neurone disease, because it's opened doors that wouldn't have opened.
And this is what you mentioned on the BBC's Midlands
it's very much so.
interview, isn't it?
I'm involved in top-level sport still, albeit disability sport. But when you've actually spent time in that environment and you see just how good some of these athletes are, I realised that my previous opinion of disability sport was so far out of kilter, it's almost embarrassing. These guys are top athletes in their own right.
Yeah,
they're elite athletes in their own right. And I get to train and coach them. You know, I train with them and coach them, and for the most part, I still keep up to a point. And I'm approaching 50. I wouldn't have been doing that if I was still involved with able-bodied sports. Coaching would have been it. I'm very much where I've always been very comfortable, and I hope that carries on for a very long while to come.
And I've never seen your kind of fight or combativeness. There's one situation I will mention in a minute, which I did see, which I'll tell you about, which you might not remember. But I know you've got into arguments online with people with motor neurone disease. Could have been, as you mentioned them a moment ago, and I know some of that has kind of got quite sort of negative and involved and stuff because of your positivity towards it, or maybe challenging the fact that a lot of them are coming at it from the point of view that it's over.
It's very sad. It's something that still doesn't sit very well with me. I can't say that I still fully appreciate the rationale, but there seems to be a high percentage of people that just give up in this situation, and that just doesn't. It's something that it's a terrible thing. So it doesn't compute. I do not understand that, and in trying to encourage people to try and stay positive, because that will only help them. I did take a little bit of a hiding on a couple of occasions, from not just from individuals with motor neurone disease, but their family members, etc. And I'm not the only person that's done that. There was somebody else with motor neurone disease, a lot younger than me. Horrifically sad. Somebody we only met a couple of times, but passed away at the age of 36. And you just think, well, that's an absolute travesty, and that should never happen. But he took a real hiding when he tried to come out and shed a positive light through the Motor Neurone Disease Association. He took a right hammering. And it's amazing how some people can be so negative to people that are already probably in as bad a place as you can get. Whereas it leaves you wondering.
Being positive or being optimistic can only help, if you like, on something.
At the very worst, it will produce a placebo effect. And I think there's an awful lot more to it than that. I think there's an awful lot more to be discovered about the phrase mind over matter. I don't distinguish between sort of mind and body. I think they're one entirely single system. And I think if you can get yourself into a very positive mindset, despite negative situations, that will have a positive physical effect on your body. And I still very strongly believe that's to be the case.
Well, the example I remember, we had a pop-up shop at the High Cross, and you came along in your Mountain Shrike.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember this chap came up who had motor neurone disease as well, and it only affected his hands.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do recall, yes.
Yeah. And he was saying about all the things that he couldn't do.
Yeah.
And you were sitting there in your chair, like, whizzing about in your Mountain Shrike, and you're like, all the things that you can't do because of your hands.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about all the things that you can do because of everything else working. And I just remember him walking away. I'm not saying that you'd changed his life and made him into a Mount Everest
I
climber.
think I failed miserably with him, actually.
But I think he'd got to the point where, for him, it was over because it was just his hands.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a big thing if you let it be a big thing. And what I was trying to convey to him was that, well, why focus on something you can't do anything about? Yeah, focus on what you can do. Yeah, and there's always a way of doing things if you really want to do it. There's always a way of doing it.
And I remember observing you and listening to you, talking to him, thinking, yeah, this isn't some sort of pretend with you, like this Mountain Shrike isn't some sort of prop that you're using as a way of attracting people to you. You genuinely believe that.
I wanted him to walk away thinking differently. And that's something I am. I'm not a particularly social person, but I would describe myself as a socially responsible person. And if I can see a situation where I can help, I'm compelled to. And just trying to change his mind is sort of something that I couldn't help myself. Like I say, I hope I had an effect on him, but I don't know if that was the case.
Well, you're normally against someone's history of being like that, aren't you? Turn someone around.
But that more often than not is what you come up against. And there have been one or two people that have listened. There's one chap up in Sheffield now that actually has started training with the guys up at Sheffield. And I'm ecstatic that he's doing that and he's helping himself, because that's the big thing. If you don't help yourself, then nobody else is going to. Not really. There's only one person responsibility for your sort of well-being. And if you're not going to look after it yourself, then you can't ask anybody else to do it for you.
Interesting. So let's move on to number 4, which is actually the Mountain Shrike. For those people here that don't know what it is, give us what's the 30-second elevator speech for selling a Mountain Shrike to someone?
It's a manual powered wheelchair. It's lever driven, so it requires quite a bit of strength, but that strength does come pretty quickly if you stick at it. That can go pretty much anywhere. I mean, that's taken on top of a mountain.
So that's kind of an off-road kind of.
Yeah, version. It is. It's an all-terrain wheelchair, and that's I can't remember the order that we did it in, but that's at the top of the last mountain of the Yorkshire 3 Peaks that we did.
What the sense of achievement did you get from doing
none
that?
whatsoever. At that point,
I only asked that question because I knew that was the answer.
Yeah. I
you were
sit there
decidedly
smiling.
Underwhelmed.
No, it was more a case of I'd set my stall out. I decided I was going to achieve it, so there was no way I was going to fail. And at that point, I think I was grinning because I was thinking, well, what am I going to do next? Actually, no, that's not true. We'd gone up the mountain and I'd sort of kept an eye on the tracks, and the guys that I was with had been overly protective, and I'd thought to myself, now we're not doing any of the safety stuff on the way back down, you're going to let me go. And that was the green. That was the green.
We're going brakes free.
And it took about, I think it was about 3 3/4 hours to climb the mountain, and it took me about, I think it was about 5 minutes shy of 90 minutes. Yeah, it was about 85 minutes on the way back down. I just flew and I arrived back before anybody else. And that I remember that being tremendous fun. Even though I nearly tipped myself out. But yeah.
Get the teasing.
But the strike itself, unbelievable. I mean, there are drainage steps all the way up. And going up them is tricky, but you can just about manage it. And sometimes somebody had to give you a push up. But on the way back down, if you sat in a chair, even though you sort of sat in a recumbent position, as you're tipping over, that every single time you go over, you think, I'm out of the chair now. I'm out of the chair now. But you never actually did with that chair. It would bounce you back in, and for that reason, it's a tremendous piece of kit. Can't speak highly enough about it.
It's liberating, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because you can, all of a sudden, you've gone from not being able to do anything off-road to probably being able to do more than you can do when you're able-bodied. Because it just required a little bit of determination, nothing more.
This is back to that comment you made earlier about MND and what you've got from it or what you're taking from it, isn't it? We'll go straight into number 5 as well, because it's again the Mountain Shrike, but with your little one.
Yeah, the
youngest one.
Again, equally determined as his dad. That you can't actually see it in that picture. That's at Bradgate Park. I think it was in one of the training sessions that I took the family out with, and it turned into more of a fun day.
So you're training for the Yorkshire Three
Peaks at that point.
Time.
So I've got that backwards. Apologies.
Yeah. So when you're training for the Yorkshire Three Peaks, I know you did quite a bit of stuff up at Bradgate Park and films and stuff, and that probably got quite a few people interested in what you were doing, because you actually had some like family time as well, family days as well. Yeah. And the photograph that we've just passed round everybody, photograph number 5, I think it was, is actually you're there with your youngest, aren't you? So, and what did he want to climb up on top of you? Or is that kind of was he following you?
He's a typical. Well, at that point he would have been 4 or 5 year old, and he's the kind of child that will look at what Dad's doing and think, that looks like fun, I'm going to give that a crack. And he just jumped on my lap and grabbed the levers. In essence, told me to let go, which obviously I couldn't do because we lost control of it. It could become quite dangerous. But you can't tell from that picture, but it is quite an incline. That he, for a good 7 or 8 pushes, pushed us up that. So my weight, the chair's weight, and his own. And it was at that point I realised that he's going to grow up into be quite a powerful young man, I think.
And they've never not known you in the chair, have
they? Erin has. Erin's
she had memories.
Erin's got memories because she infrequently comes up to me now and she says, well, you used to throw me in the air, which I did. I can remember sort of I would pick her up, throw her and catch her, and she can recall that. Isaac, I did that too, but I would have to rest up against the wall to do it. Just in case, but I, again, when I was affected, principally just in the lower limbs. But I've tried. Kate and I have tried our very best to treat it as ordinary. So, as far as the kids are concerned, there's nothing unusual going on.
I need to tell you this story. So before Christmas, you came in with your 3 children, and Tina brought Cruz in, a grandson who's 4. So he was the youngest. That was 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9, wasn't it? For a Saturday morning session.
And they thoroughly enjoyed themselves.
And what's really interesting about that is afterwards we went, when we took Cruz for sort of baby Chino and all that, kind of talking about the session. We were talking about the 3 kids, and he was talking about Kate, and he was talking about you, and in the whole conversation, every time we tried to bring it round to, is there anything you noticed about different people? That's totally oblivious.
The kids,
absolutely oblivious to shape, size, colour, vehicles. Dave's always got a chair with him. That's cool.
Absolutely. As things should be. Exactly.
It's interesting. A really interesting point, isn't it?
But yes, but they can adapt ever so easily. And I think when you put a little bit of effort into not focusing on the negative sides of what might happen, and just deflecting anything along those, treating them, respecting the fact that they're individuals, they're intelligent young people. If they ask a question, then you answer it as honestly as possible. But also back that up with, well, that's not something you need to worry about. It's, as it stands at the minute, I'm bucking the trend, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that seems to satisfy them. They're quite happy with that. They can see that I'm still far more active than the average able-bodied person, probably well beyond that. And that's the way I look at life. Certainly
some of the parents, or maybe the dad of some of their school friends and stuff, when it comes to going out in the fresh air and stuff. It's interesting. So the next picture I'm going to whiz around is, this looks like you're in, would that describe as like a racing chair?
It's a racing wheelchair.
I suppose this is what most people would know around a wheelchair being from like the Paralympics.
It is, that's exactly what it is. That's a distance racing wheelchair. That is my most of my embarrassment, my one failure so far to date. That was the Leicester Marathon, which I managed to get to the 18-mile mark and not through fatigue, had to drop out. One thing I hadn't banked on was the incredible pain you got being in one position in the chair in your legs. And I wish I'd spoken to
So it wasn't your chest or your stomach or your shoulders or your back?
I think for the previous 5 miles, I got increasingly bad pain in my legs. I think in the last mile, I'd stopped about 3 times just to adjust my legs, to put them into a different position. But it was getting to the point where I had to stop every 50 metres, and I thought, well, it's just not maintainable, which is a real shame. And I'm embarrassed to say I burst into tears at that point, because I don't do failing, not in sports. and I let myself down. And,
Personally, I never knew you'd failed at anything, Dave. And
I'm
not sure why we've brought you on and whether we've
that's it. Yeah, that's it. Let me go now. Yeah, I've obviously since done other races.
What did it teach you? What did you learn from that?
That I need to put more effort into preparation.
Okay.
And probably communicate better, because
so was it the distance, not knowing what it would feel like at 18 miles as opposed to...
I think the best way of answering that is that I have had a conversation with a wheelchair racer, somebody that's competed for GB afterwards, and he very swiftly informed me that even as a completely severed spine, I can't remember which vertebrae it is, but he has nothing below his waist. He gets pain in his legs.
Really?
After after a prolonged period in one position. So there must be a pseudo element to it.
Yeah.
But I should have asked that question to start. That would have motivated me to better prepare, because I just thought I could do it.
This is really part of your next. I'm on to what's the next thing? Tick. What am I on to the next thing? Yeah. Now you're doing the London Marathon.
Yeah, not in that.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
So,
I'd say I shouldn't be negative about that. I wish I could do it in that, because I'd be a lot more prepared this time. But unfortunately, they won't let me do that. So it'll be.
So we'll be using a chair similar to this, or
it'll either be this one.
Shrike?
It'll either be this one, or still trying to sort out the finer details there. It'll be something along the lines of what I'm in now. Yeah, it probably need to be a little bit more of a hybrid sports design, but to what degree I'm still sort of in negotiation.
And something like the hand operated Mountain Shrike, is that something that's not allowed in the London Marathon?
No,
or is it more a case of
you can use that. There's the reason I wouldn't use the Mountain Shrike is because of its weight. Okay. They weigh about 26 kilos. Okay. My weight, 26 kilos over 26 miles, that's going to be a big ask. Whereas this chair probably only weighs about 11 kilos. And you can get considerably lighter chairs. I have got a setup that allows me to use a very similar drive system, and the one thing that I have lost in recent months is function below the elbow. So
from a grip point
yes, I've got very little in the way of grip now. You can see my hands, I don't hold my hands properly, and actually gripping these big grips that I put on 2 years ago, after about 10-15 minutes I can't grip them at all. So I've got a drive system that I can attach to a day chair now called a New Drive, and I don't want to use that in the London Marathon because it will slow me down. But worst case scenario, if the weather's not good, or if I can't find an alternative way to get the push rooms to work for me, then I should use that, and it'll be.
And by fixing it, does that mean that you then can't do it how you want to, or can you mix and match depending on?
It's limiting the amount of time that you can spend in contact with the push rim, if you like. So the drivers literally go from there to there. Okay. So you're pushing about a fifth of the push rim, whereas if you're using the push rim, I could probably push. I would say somewhere near approaching half if I really sort of went to it. So the amount of time that you can stay in contact with the push rim increases the amount of power you can put through it, and your speed obviously is affected by that. I could go considerably faster if I was just using a push rim.
Now, we're talking about things like, we'll mention wheelchair rugby now, and sport and things like that generally. From a motor neuron disease point of view, MND point of view, what should you be able to do at this stage when it
certainly
comes to
not sports?
Yeah, at all.
Yeah, no, they again being
because we get used to you being
fair.
like this. Those of us that know you, we get used to you, but it's not.
Things are changing. Ideas are changing. There was great concern when I announced to the medical professionals looking after me that I was going to go back to sport, and that was what I was going to do. And there was little that was going to change my mind. That there was a risk of bringing early death to the neurons, and that just didn't sit properly with me. I thought it's a no-lose situation, in that, okay, if that happens, that happens, but at least I've had a crack. But as it turns out, particularly in my particular version of motor neurone disease, that isn't the case at all. If anything, exercising them slows down the progression of the disease, and the more you do, the more the benefits you see. I mean, but that's no different to anybody else.
So do you think MND is different for everybody, but because we don't have a bespoke program designed for each individual MND survivor, we end up putting people into the bracket of, oh, you're one of those, and therefore this is what's going to happen, and people just go along with that?
Now, MND is an encapsulation of multiple diseases that manifest in a very similar way. When I was diagnosed, there was very little knowledge of that. MND was pretty much MND. Now there's a lot more of an understanding of the separate diseases. There's still very little understanding of the mechanics of what leads to it. But there are certain types of motor neurone disease which seem to progress faster than others. And that includes the kind that I've got. But in some instances, it can be exactly the opposite as expected. And I'm very lucky in being able to report that that's the case for me. There are certainly people with my particular mutation that don't do terribly well, don't hang around for very long. And there are other people that do, you know. So I think that sort of comes back to an earlier comment that I think a big chunk of that's mindset. I think if you think to yourself, well, actually, okay, that's the situation, but I don't have to go the same route as everybody
It's taking
else.
ownership of it,
It
guess,
is,
isn't it?
yeah.
And sort of just
And you coined the right
realistic,
phrase there. I mean, you came up with it. I've got MND, but it hasn't got me. That pretty much summarised my approach to the disease right from day one.
Do you do reading and research and stuff? I mean, I know I send you articles every now and again, and I'm never quite sure how to word it, which is, I mean, particularly if they're quite positive, because it's like, well, are you sharing like false hope with people? I always say to you, just in case you missed it, isn't it? You always say thank you, and then I'm assuming you then follow it up. Are you quite well read on what's going on in the field?
In a very lazy way, yes.
Okay.
I do keep abreast. I do a lot of reading. I have challenged the researchers quite a bit, and they've thrown it back in my face for the most part, and quite rightly so.
You probably quite enjoy that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. In a strange way. I'd say I think there's an awful lot of people with motor neurone disease that probably have better knowledge of it than the people that are looking after them, purely because they're living it.
So, Dave, how different are you from the pre-MND Dave? Because we've only ever known you
in a chair, absolutely.
How different would you be? I mean, I know stubbornness, you've already mentioned things through sport and been quite determined.
At my core, there's no difference. I'm still me, nothing's changed at all. My appreciation for other people's predicaments and how I approach them, I used to be very brash. Matter of fact, I would view something in my way, and I'd rather foolishly open my mouth and say, but no, that's how it is. Make a judgment. And that's the wrong way of going about it. And I think I've learnt to sort of approach those situations a great deal better. But yeah, you asked me what's changed, and the honest answer is very little, John, very little. Yeah, I'm a stubborn mule, I always have been, and I think I always will be.
Okay. My last question about your family, and then we'll leave them alone. Do you parent differently because of your MND?
No, I mean, it's trickier because the kids know full well that I can't get up and chase them. And they know that full well. But
you'll catch them eventually.
Okay, absolutely. And they know that too. That's it. So
it's full circle, isn't it?
Yeah, so no, I don't approach them in any different way. It would be doing the kids an injustice if I did. Because they just need stability, they just need consistency.
Because ultimately that's what they will remember at any point, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's what my parents gave me, and I think they deserve exactly the same, and I'll do my best to give them that. Yeah, it's people have pulled a face at me, and I'm thinking specifically of people with motor neurone disease, but things only change if you let them. Yeah, that's a mental state.
Right, so we're on to picture number 7.
Yes.
Okay, again, you in a Mountain Shrike.
Great Packles Way. Sorry, Old Packles Way, sorry.
That definitely looks like some sort of marketing pose to me. That's probably the only time I've ever seen you pose for a photograph.
Do you want to know what I was thinking there? This is so I should pass it round.
Is it actually over?
That's the beginning.
Oh, that's the beginning?
The very beginning.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
you look so fresh, I thought maybe that was it.
I wasn't. It's about a 3-foot mound with a painted rock that is the beginning of a copper mine run that runs for 26 miles through the Lake District near Coniston. And I was out of breath just pushing the Mountain Shrike up onto that 3-foot mound.
Was this the start of your training?
This was the event. My lung capacity last year dropped dramatically. It went from I was sort of blowing around about 60-70% of what you'd expect a person of my height and build to below 50, and that's the cut-off point where people start to get issues. And another reason that exercise is so important, and there is actually a study out there now that hasn't properly been pushed out that has shown that actually especially for lung capacity issues, resistance training is very, very good for people with motor neurone disease. But again, it's not been pushed out as hard as I think it should have been.
Is there an element of like kind of use it or lose it in that scenario? Absolutely. So if you're not keeping that lung capacity, you're fighting against losing it.
That is the case more hugely than you might think as well, in my experience. I say my lung capacity just before we did that event dropped quite dramatically. I knew that I'd struggle. But I knew if I got to warm up, and the other thing as well with motor neurone disease, as your body warms up, the nerves function a little bit better. So I thought, if I just sort of stick at it and take my time to start, I'll be all right. And about 2 hours after that, I was fine. But the look on my face there wasn't one of opposing. I think he was thinking, I might have bitten off a little bit more than I can chew. Okay. That was the thought in my mind then. And I just thought, no, well, give it a crack.
So if we go back to one of the previous pictures where you're in the racing wheelchair, where at 18 miles you'd realised you'd bitten off a little bit more than you'd show. That was the second time.
Yeah, well, I hadn't. But I hadn't, because I proved myself wrong. It was a thought. Yeah. And again, it's just think, okay, just go easy to start and then just build on it. And within 2 hours, I'd warmed up and my lungs were working well enough. But at that point, I'd like say just pushing up a 3-foot path, I was out of breath.
Now you mentioned lung capacity, so I'll come on to our 8th photograph, which is actually you with your colleagues from the
teammates,
Leicester Tigers wheelchair rugby team, because you've actually stopped playing competitive wheelchair rugby now.
We'll see about that. But yes,
okay.
No, it is. I think realistically, I can't cope with the intensity. I can do distance now, because if I get to the point where I'm struggling from a breathing perspective, I can just ease back myself when it's something that I'm doing purely alone. But in a team environment, you have to work for your teammates, and it's a very intense game, and you get no rest at all, not at any point. And I was finding that I was starting to struggle big time with that. And again, this is just the way I approach things. I'm saying that to you, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, there'll be a time when I can give that a crack again.
Do you take your kit to every game?
Of course.
Okay. Just in case you have to kind of run on a super sub.
There's a competition coming up in about 3 weeks' time. And
I just said run on then. Do you notice that? Roll on a super sub.
Yeah. I'll be in my kit. Yeah. But I'll
ready.
My principal role there will be coaching. Yeah. But that was an interesting 2 days. That was. I'd say very pretty, very picturesque. It's the first time I'd ever been to the Lake District, and I'll certainly be going back again. It's a lovely area of the country. Can't believe I've not been before.
So why were you guys out on the pitch there at Welford Road?
Oh, right, I've gone back to the old pitch. Sorry.
That's right, mate, of course.
That was the first title that we brought in. We've won it again since. It doesn't look like we're going to repeat it again this year. But the National League title, our name sort of appears on it 2 years on the trot. We've still not got the cup competition yet, but hopefully we'll get that this year.
And who are your main competitors?
Don't
say Sheffield, because you've just introduced someone to.
No. There are 2 London sides that are very, very good, and the main competitors are a northwest side called Crash, and they've got some exceptional players.
Hence the name.
Yeah. They've always had exceptional players. There's one in particular at the minute that has come on at the elite level. leaps and bounds over the last 12 months, and as it stands at the minute, he's almost unplayable. So it's going to be a huge undertaking to get the better of them, but it won't stop the lads trying.
Right, so we're on to our final photograph.
Okay.
And I'm assuming this is one that was taken as you crossed the finish line? Is
Yes.
that a kind of finish line photograph
It was,
of
yeah,
the Great
absolutely.
North Run?
The Great North Run.
Now, for the people here and when people look online, look on the video, are these the hand
They're the new
cranks?
drives.
Yeah, the hand
absolutely.
drives you were
So
talking about.
that will be the... I'm hoping not to have to use them, but as a fallback, that will give me a guaranteed finish for the London Marathon.
What kind of time did you do? Were you happy with your time?
Around about the 2 hour 30, 40, something like that.
You've done like a series of progressions from, you've done the outdoor kind of progression, and you've done the Three Peaks Challenge, Yorkshire Three Peaks Challenge. You've now done the Great North Run, and you're about to go on to the Leicester Marathon.
The London Marathon.
London Marathon, yeah. What's...
Not just the London Marathon though, what I'm hoping to do this year, and I'm still waiting for a great run to come back to me, is do their 12 main events in the UK, 10k or over, and the London Marathon. So
my thing was, what's
Sorry.
after the London Marathon? So that
No,
is
it will be part
hopefully,
of, yeah.
hopefully those 12.
Yeah.
And from an outdoor point of view,
entirely, yeah. I prefer to be outdoors.
yeah. Do you have any kind of aims? We're not talking sort of
To do myself justice.
across North America or to the Arctic or anything kind of that extreme.
Well, you never know. You never know, John.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Don't show this to Kate. But
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We'll encourage her not to watch it because that photograph's in it, maybe. But,
yeah, she wouldn't be surprised if I decided to come up with another harebrained scheme. But when you get to the point where you've made that sort of decision, you've already succeeded at that point because
you've made the decision. It gives you something to move
to aim at. Yeah.
Okay.
And like you say, as pathetic as it sounds, once you've made that decision, the fear of not achieving it is all the motivation you need. Because that's something that just doesn't sit well with me.
So to finish off, I want to talk to you a little bit about ALS, because that's what a lot of people will probably have heard of.
Yes.
Because of the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Absolutely.
Or maybe even participated in the Ice Bucket Challenge without necessarily realising that it's part of that MND family. Is that a good way of describing
it is. Yeah, I mean, it's an odd situation because the disease is called different things in different countries. I think the way they do it across here is the most sensible, but like with many things, it's the Americans that lead the way there. And they call motor neurone disease generally ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is just one form of motor neurone disease, but they use that as the reference for most times of motor neuron genes, and that's the one that's the most familiar. It's the one that's most common.
And what's the general consensus of what's come out of the Ice Bucket Challenge? You know, with the money that's been raised, has it really made a difference? Does that amount of money coming through something like that really help with research and being able to push?
I believe it has.
Boundaries.
Has it gone as far as it needs to? Perhaps not. But the one thing it did do is raise awareness of the disease. And I think there are a lot more people out there that now have some familiarity with it rather than no concept of it at all.
And maybe also the correct diagnosis as well of what their own particular condition is. So.
But it's to actually get, unfortunately, as it's the case with everyone, everything's dictated by money these days, and it is the money that's going to, or the ability to continue generating money that goes into research, which will eventually find a cure for this nasty set of diseases.
So, final question. Okay. Do you think that all the money from things like, you know, the Ice Bucket Challenge, all the interest, the raising of awareness with it, that will ever get to the point where there is a way of living with it, a bit like, you know, we've got with HIV, where suddenly, you know, it's not, I'm loath to use the term death sentence, but, you know, whereas AIDS and HIV used to be a death sentence, now you can get it and literally live a long, productive life. Do you think we'll get to that point? And from your own research and stuff, I know a lot of the articles that I send you, for lots of different diseases, you know, things like dementia, Parkinson's, so many different things. It all comes back to the gut.
It does.
Doesn't it? It's really interesting that a lot of it still comes back to
it does. The gut flora. It's a conversation I've had.
I suppose your body and mind example you
Again,
used earlier.
Yeah, it's the same thing. There was a recent paper that I read that suggested that there was one type of microbe completely absent in almost all patients with motor neurone disease, which I thought was very interesting. And then you'd scratched around.
That's quite definite.
That's a quite definite thing. Now, obviously,
something
it's just
missing,
one person's white paper and their research. That needs to be looked at again. But it does all boil down to money. There are only finite amount of trains or lines of investigation that they can follow with the limited money that they're given. And the Ice Bucket Challenge did raise an awful lot of money, but I think that's been exhausted now. Doddy Weir has done a great deal with regards to sort of raising the profile again and getting money in to be spent on research. I believe he's somewhere in the region of £5 million that he's raised and chucked into research, which is a superb effort. I think, I hope that there are drugs around the corner that in most cases will stop the disease dead. And off the back of that, there may well be medicines in the future that will reverse some of the symptoms. There are certainly good noises coming out of the medical profession, but the really hard thing for people in my situation is that they're aware fully of just how long it takes for those drugs to actually find their way to market.
Well, from the first white paper through trials
yes.
and everything.
I mean, you're talking 10 to 15 years. You know, if something's fast tracked, most people don't survive much beyond a couple of years. So it's not much in the way of good news for most. But I think any news is good news.
How can we follow you on social media?
Okay. There's a few places. There's
if we want
Twitter.
to donate money to you for
absolutely.
to the London Marathon.
There's at NED70 on Twitter. I think it's Needham1452 on Instagram, and just look me up, David Needham, on Facebook. There's plenty of reference there to all of the fundraising that I'm doing.
I've never interviewed anybody who just said, just look me up.
Yeah.
That's cool. So Dave, thanks very much for coming along, being our first guest for the People, Places and Events Reportage Club. All of the details are in the description below of how you can find out about the Dot Media Centre and its programme. And again, if you want to come along, feel free to drop us an email to dotmediacentre@gmail.com and look out for the programme of other events that are coming up. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.